Hey everybody, Brayden here, welcome back to a new video. Today we are going to be covering my 10th ever tournament game. This was the third tournament I have ever played, and this was the third game. My opponent was playing with the white pieces, their name Lorenzo, and I was playing with the black pieces, and they were unrated. I still was 1324 rating. Let's see how the game progressed. E4, E5. Already I want to talk about this. I think e4, e5 is something that a lot of beginners should play because it will give you a lot of strategically rich positions, but it'll also give you a lot of tactical positions, and tactics are often where beginners go wrong. So if they're introduced to a lot of tactics all the time when they're playing, then they're more likely to actually grow from it and actually learn and absorb the information and absorb the tactical themes they constantly see. Let's continue on. Knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5, which is my favorite opening, the Ruy Lopez. a6, bishop takes c6, d takes 6, and d3. I think it is still important to notice that after knight takes e5, there's queen d4. You really have to go back, and after a queen to e2, takes. If anyone's playing for the win, it would be black, but realistically at this level or at a lower level, it's still either person's game. It's just that black has the bishop pair and they have the right to castle. So usually you would say that black has the advantage because bishop pairs in this type of position means a lot, and also having the ability to castle just gives you more options. So anyways, let's move on. So of course, this was not played in the game. D3. So very good. I played bishop to d6. It defends e5, which is a great move. c4, knight to f6, and bishop to g5. I would actually like to mention something here. c5. It looks interesting, right? Because, well, you can take on e5 in the end. Well, you can't. And there is a specific reason why. After bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, there's queen d4. This is quite obvious. This is a normal theme with taking on e5, and it's a reason why it can be undefended. However, you have to back it up after bishop e3, which is the tricky part. And this is how it actually is okay for black. After takes, d4, which looks like a fork, there's bishop to b4 check. And all of a sudden, now black can take on e4 or just move the queen somewhere else, and they're up a clean piece. So this would be losing for white. But it is an interesting line to look at, because if you could trade the c4 pawn for this e5 pawn, that would be advantageous to white, because they got rid of one of our center pawns for one of their flank pawns. So instead, bishop to g5 instead. And it's an okay move. It develops the piece. h6 does ask it a question though, and this is a very important question. Do you take on f6, or do you retreat to h4 or e3? And I believe here you should retreat to h4 or e3, preference, but h4 is likely just better. And the reason why is because you do not want to take and give your opponent, which is me, the bishop pair. Giving the bishop pair up in a structure, a pawn structure like this, is not great. And although this might seem like an advanced theme, I'm not going to make it too complex. Basically, in this type of position, if things get really open, the bishops have a lot more strength because they're able to move across the board a lot easier, so it's more likely to give black better options. And unfortunately, instead of bishop h4, we're at g5, bishop g3, and maybe a queen e7 could be played. This is a little interesting. Instead, my opponent took on f6, and this was the start of their issues. Here, black is better. However slight it may be, they have the bishop pair, and as you can see, these bishops, they feel like they're quite strong, and that there's a lot of potential along these diagonals if we can somehow get rid of this e5 pawn, especially if they castle. But okay, let's continue on with the game. Knight to c3, so they continue their development, castles and castles. Queen to g6, just trying for any bishop to h3 trickies, might as well try it, right? King to h1, of course they're not going to fall for that. Bishop e6, queen to d2, so they finish their development. And here is an interesting move by me. It's not quite right though. It has the right idea, and computers do like the move if it were later and prefaced by something else. However, on the move, it's not so great. Here, I played the move b5. And b5 is interesting, but it's not quite timed right. And the reason why is because of c5, where e5 is hanging, and after bishop takes e5, knight takes, and c6 might be hanging in some lines, but here, white does have a reasonable advantage, and if they want to, they can actually play a move like d4, and they have a lot of central control, and this can be very, very scary for black. Instead, after queen to d2 and b5, f6, surprisingly, is a very strong move, and then b5 is good again, where after f6, there's no c5 because e5 is defended by the pawn. So, kind of a weird, interesting move that actually helps black a lot and causes white a lot of problems. But okay, b5, and they played rook a to e1, and that's not really quite the right move. Again, as I mentioned, c5 would be very strong for my opponent, where I have to take, and e5 hangs, and if they want, they can go for c6. For example, knight takes e5, queen f6, knight to c6, and if I try something like bishop takes a2, then rook takes and queen takes c6, and it's even material, but I lost my bishop here, and they have two central pawns, and I have none. So, who's better here? It doesn't feel like I have the advantage anymore. So, queen to d2, b5, rook a e1. B takes e4, that's why rook a to e1 was not really that great. If anything, if they really needed to, then they could have taken. But taking does benefit me because it fixes my structure. And now the structure is actually a little bit better for black, which is nice, and maybe a c5, c4 can come. Instead of rook a e1, and this pawn is just undefended after b takes c4, d takes c4, and bishop takes c4. So I think they just missed this. And they tried for a counterattack, but this didn't really help. Instead, they should have played just a rook to g1 and just kept the exchange. But they played the move knight to h4, trying to go for activity. However, this loses the exchange because now I can attack two pieces at once. I can maintain the attack on the f1 rook, and I can attack the knight on h4. And this is exactly what I did. I played queen to f6. And all of a sudden, you have to ask the question, which piece is more important to you? Of course, the knight is more important in this scenario than the rook. So they played g3 because losing an exchange is not as bad as losing a piece. Losing a piece, there's not much hope. But if you lose an exchange, you can always win that exchange back. And plus, it's just one piece for another piece, right? You can try to prove that your minor piece is stronger than your opponent's rook. But that's that's its whole thing, and rarely does that work, but it's a lot better than losing a full piece. Bishop takes f1, rook takes f1, and rook f to d8. So just lining up the rook with the queen, trying to get my pieces as active as possible. That's exactly what I should be doing. f4 was not a good move from my opponent, and this was definitely the wrong direction. And here they're missing that after e takes f4, they can't even recapture really, because if they take with the rook, I take back, and if they take, then take, and they're down two exchanges. This is hopeless. Or they take with the queen, which bishop takes, that doesn't work either. Or they take with the pawn, and if they take with the pawn, we win their knight. And this is exactly what happened in the game. My opponent, I guess, missed that I could just take their knight after g takes f4. Rook to g1, bishop to c5, and now they're losing more material. I think they were going for a queen to g2, where they're attacking g7, but after bishop to c5, I attack their queen, and I attack their rook, and unfortunately, this is over after rook to g3, missing that their queen was also under threat. After rook takes d2, my opponent resigned the game, and now I am 2 out of 3 for this tournament, and there is 1 game left in this 4-game tournament. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the 4th game of this 3rd tournament. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you later. Have a good one.